Today we're taking a look at Sterling Hayden and his work in unabashed anti-fascist Rod Serling's holiday special, Carol for Another Christmas. Born in Upper Montclair, New Jersey, USA in 1916, Sterling Relier Walter grew up in the coastal towns of New England. His father passed away when he was still young, and Sterling would be adopted at age 9 by his stepfather, James Hayden, changing his name to Sterling Walter Hayden. He grew up to become a mariner, earning his master's license and skippering a trading schooner in the Caribbean. He sailed around the world several times, serving as a sailor and a fireman, and at the age of 22, he was awarded command of the square rigger Florence C. Robinson. It is, admittedly, an unusual way to prepare for an acting career, and Sterling Hayden had no particular desire at the time to become an actor. However, he was photographed at the annual Gloucester, Massachusetts Fisherman's Race in 1938, and wound up on the cover of a magazine, where he was seen by an executive at Paramount Pictures. Out of nowhere, Hayden was called in by the studio to do a screen test in New York with James Cagney's sister Jeannie. Hayden would later recall the screen test and his initial confusion with everything that was happening so quickly. But when Paramount offered him a 7-year contract beginning at $250 a week, the equivalent then of $4,904 today, it was a no-brainer. Hayden bought a car and moved his mother across the country, saying, "I had only one plan in mind, to get $5,000. I knew where there was a schooner, and then I'd haul ass." Paramount put a huge promotional push behind Hayden, billing him in the media as the most beautiful man in the movies and the beautiful blonde Viking god. He made his film debut in 1941 in Virginia, acting opposite his future wife Madeline Carroll. The two would appear later the same year in Bahama Passage, and then with only 2 movies, Hayden walked away from Hollywood, with Photoplay printing his statement that, "I'm no actor, I'm a sailor." He enlisted in the Army to fight in World War II, but during his training in Scotland, he broke his ankle and the Army gave him a discharge. Recovering from his injury, he tried to return to his private sailing career by buying a half interest in a schooner, but he couldn't scrape together the money. Desperate to find work and be of some use to the war effort, he enlisted in the Marine Corps as a private, using the alias John Hamilton. He would shortly be recommended for officer candidate school and, after graduating, would be commissioned as a second lieutenant and transferred to service with William J. Donovan's Office of the Coordinator of Information, or as it would later be known, the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. He took on undercover agent missions and sailed supply runs to Yugoslav partisans. He would parachute into fascist Croatia and would coordinate air crew rescue teams in enemy territory. By 1945, the former most beautiful man in the movies had already been awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action and attained the rank of captain, as well as a commendation from Yugoslavia's Josip Broz Tito. Leaving active duty, Hayden returned to Hollywood, telling the Los Angeles Times, "I feel a real obligation to make this a better country, and I believe the movies are the place to do it." Paramount accepted him back for 1947's Blaze of Noon, but suspended his contract after he turned down another role. His comeback was almost cut short as he was called to testify before the House Committee on Un-American Activities due to his 1946 membership in the Communist Party. He claimed later that, in addition to threatening his career, the FBI made it clear to him that they would send him to jail and see to it that he was stripped of custody of his children. Hayden wound up testifying and naming names, outing other members of the Hollywood entertainment industry who were also communists. His wife at the time, Betty DeNoon, defended Hayden's testimony, saying that he had only named people whom the committee had already confirmed were communists, while Hayden would write in his autobiography, "I don't think you have the foggiest notion of the contempt I have had for myself since the day I did that thing." In 1950, Hayden would star in John Huston's The Asphalt Jungle, cementing his return to Hollywood. He would spend the 50s working primarily in westerns and war films, although he would also appear as Sir Gawain in Prince Valiant and in the noir classics Naked Alibi and Suddenly. Hollywood primarily saw him as a B-movie actor, but Hayden bristled at the idea, saying that he was not an actor. His career was done purely to pay for his ability to go sailing. Following his divorce from Betty DeNoon in 1958, he was awarded custody of his children and sailed to Tahiti with them. He had obtained financing from Republic Pictures to make a movie, and that was where he intended to do it. The movie was never completed, and a court would order Hayden to repay Republic the entire amount. But the trip was photographed by Dodie Weston Thompson, and the photographs would be printed by U.S. Camera and Travel. He didn't appear on television or in film for all of 1959, and by 1960, he was telling the press that he preferred to think of himself not as an actor, but as a sailor or a writer. His autobiography, Wanderer, was published in 1963. In 1964, he appeared in Carol for Another Christmas on television and played the role of Brigadier General Jack D. Ripper in Stanley Kubrick's Cold War satire, Dr. Strangelove. By the end of the decade, Hayden expressed distaste for Hollywood and divided his time between living with his family in Wilton, Connecticut, and living on his canal barge in the heart of Paris. He did continue to work as an actor, but insisted it was solely for the paycheck.
Actually, I'm here because I understand this is an equity production, as in guaranteed money.
In 1983, he appeared on camera for the last time in a German-produced documentary of his life that was translated into English under the title Lighthouse of Chaos.
Do you know what he teaches? Do you know what Korzeniowski and Harris both teach? 18th century European literature. What's that got to do with politics?
I don't know, and I'm not interested in finding out. Get smart, boy. We've been digging his kind out of the woodwork for years.
On October 25th, 1963, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Adlai Stevenson was heckled and spat on by anti-UN protesters during an appearance in Dallas, Texas. And at one point he was hit over the head with a sign by one of the protesters. The incident caught the attention of the director of the UN Special Fund, Paul G. Hoffman, who had been watching support for the UN wane among the population of the United States and had already noticed that Republican Barry Goldwater was intending to run for president on a platform of limiting U.S. involvement with the organization. Feeling that the U.S. would surely back the United Nations if they could just see the importance of the work they were doing, he reached out to his friend and public relations executive, Edgar Rosenberg, with the idea of creating television dramas to educate the public about the role of the UN. Together, the two incorporated the Telson Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to producing Hoffman's UN-centered television dramas. Telson received a $4 million grant from Xerox, whose public relations department at the time expressed an interest in purchasing advertising on shows that get talked about. The funding, equivalent to just over $35.5 million in today's dollars, was planned to cover the production of 6 made-for-TV movies and to purchase the airtime from the networks so that the movies could run without commercial interruption. Ultimately, unforeseen expenses caused the series to be trimmed down to only 5 films, and the 5th film, The Kashmir Story, would be left unfinished and unaired after armed conflict broke out between India and Pakistan over the status of Kashmir. The first of the Telson productions in the series was set to debut on December 28, 1964 on all 3 networks. Produced and directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, his sole television credit, with a script by Twilight Zone scribe Rod Serling. The movie featured Sterling Hayden, Ben Gazzara, and Peter Sellers. In order to keep the budget for the production low, all talent had been asked to either donate their time or to accept union scale. Peter Sellers, at the time, was receiving $750,000 for each appearance he made in film, and had been looking for a small project to get himself back on his feet after suffering a near-fatal heart attack. He agreed to the Screen Actors Guild minimum payment of $350 to take the role of the Imperial Me. Sterling Hayden, the man who, aside from his comeback announcement, had always and would always insist that all he cared about in acting was the paycheck, would turn down a competing offer of $50,000 to appear in a film being shot at the same time in order to accept $350 a week to play Serling's Daniel Grudge. The theme, meanwhile, would be composed by Henry Mancini, who completely waived his fee for his services. Carol for Another Christmas would be filmed during the fall of 1964 at the Michael Meyerberg Studios. With the special announced, the series was suddenly targeted with a letter-writing campaign from the far right-wing John Birch Society, calling the UN, quote, an instrument of the Soviet communist conspiracy. The organization would claim that it sent 51,000 letters written by 13,000 people, weird flex but okay, to the Xerox Corporation. Xerox in turn would respond that it only received 29,000 protest letters from the John Birch Society, authored by 6,000 people, and that it had also received letters of support and encouragement, 6,000 letters from 6,000 people. Xerox continued to support the series. However, the John Birch Society did succeed in scaring the networks. Specifically, CBS decided that it was suddenly, officially demanding neutrality from all of its programming on the issue of U.S. membership in the UN. A UN representative spoke with CBS and confirmed that, yes, the show produced by a UN official specifically to educate the public about the UN was indeed going to be pro-UN, upon which announcement CBS canceled its plans to air the special. NBC, meanwhile, introduced a new broadcast regulation for their programming that all programs needed to be pre-approved by NBC and, quote, must not contain material soliciting funds or appealing for support of the United Nations. NBC, too, would cancel their plans to air the special. While ABC would also receive letters of protest, they issued no new regulations or statements regarding those protests and simply continued ahead with the plans to air the special. Critical response to the broadcast was mixed, with many critics complaining that it was overblown, preachy, and didactic. Even the positive reviews of the time complained that the show was not likely to convince anybody of the value of the UN, as it appeared to be preaching to the already converted. Audiences, by and large, were more supportive, although conservative voices complained that television programs had no business supporting the UN. That's right. Far-right conservatives have been complaining about the entertainment industry making everything political for literal ages, and they still always act like it's something new. For the love of Pete, even Dickens had to put up with this bullshit.
I have feelings. Nothing on this earth could force me to eat while starving people watch me.
Watching makes all the difference, what? You never saw them while tearing into your mashed potatoes. They weren't actually there when you buttered your bread. There. Better, Mr. Grudge?
Sterling Hayden's Daniel Grudge departs from Ebenezer Scrooge in some significant ways, including the fact that he did have a family. His son, Marley, has been dead 20 years, killed in 1944 in action in World War II on Christmas Eve. But perhaps the most significant departure from Scrooge is that Grudge is not specifically a miser. He lives in luxury and opulence, attended by servants and dining from expensive place settings. But as Serling points out, one doesn't have to be a miser to deny the milk of human kindness to others. Grudge is an isolationist, an anti-communist, and, while it's never explicitly stated, his dialogue hints at a very strong streak of white supremacist thought. He opposes refugee status for any and all requesters, and has used his power to cancel the cultural exchange program at the nearby university. This is all sounding like it could have been written at any point in the last 20 years. Are we ever going to fix this? Marley's appearance is brief and silent, and he is not accompanied by the desperate spirits. But when Grudge finds himself confronted by the ghost of Christmas past, played by singer Steve Lawrence, he stands on the deck of a ship surrounded by the coffins of the dead from past wars. The ghost of Christmas present isn't accompanied by the children named Want and Ignorance, but who needs them? The point is made as he gorges himself from Grudge's table while a camp full of refugees sits in dismal squalor on the other side of a razor wire fence. Skipping ahead for just a second, I'm on the fence as to whether or not this production gets a Cratchit point, but ultimately I'm giving it one for visiting on Christmas Day, because the film features Grudge on Christmas morning going to the kitchen to eat breakfast for once, not alone, but in the company of the married couple who work as his cook and butler. As for Grudge's future, he doesn't fall into the grave, but he probably wishes he did, as the ghost of Christmas future never tells him about his ultimate fate. And that's because when all is said and done, the ultimate impact of Grudge on the future has nothing to do with him. It's all about the fact that his failure to act has caused harm to his fellow human beings. Instead of seeing the reactions to his own death, he gets to see a post-apocalyptic kangaroo court presided over by the imperial me who rules on a platform of absolute selfishness, a platform that was satire in the 1960s, but now sounds an awful lot like modern conservative media, not to mention sounding almost exactly like any given speech from Donald Trump. This Scrooge is basically every so-called moderate Republican whose silence and inaction has allowed the rise of an actual fascist wing to the top of their party. I'm calm. Don't put up the technical difficulties panel. I can keep calm. After a lifetime being told by teachers and mentors and other writers and fans that subtlety is the mark of good writing, that you never want to hammer a point home, and that nobody knowing what point you're trying to make is the mark of handling a controversial subject well, it's refreshing to watch this special. It's the kind of writing that Aaron Sorkin is convinced that he does, stridently and violently political and unapologetic about it. This is one of the few A Christmas Carol variations that acknowledges what a lot of people try to forget about the story, that it is inherently stridently political. Dickens wasn't making a point about people not being friendly at Christmas. He was making a point about the poorhouses and the debtors' prisons. He wasn't suggesting that all we need is to go to a party to be Christmassy, but rather laying out the Christmas spirit as an inherently liberal value based on the desire to truly help other people, And Serling gets that and puts it on the screen in plain speech. It's not enough to fill the air with platitudes, says Serling, but one has to actually commit to taking the actions to make the world a better place. If you're interested in seeing this show, it's currently available on HBO Max. But be prepared to get angry, because the fact is, all of this show is extremely prescient, none of this has been fixed, and that, my friends, is some grade A. All right, I am calm. What do you think of this overtly political take on A Christmas Carol? Drop down into the comments and let me know. While you're down there, there's a like button that you can click in order to show that you liked the video. You can also hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Clicking subscribe means that you'll be notified every time there is a new video on the channel. In addition, there is a share button that you can click, and you can share this video with other people because sharing is caring. Of course, if you'd like to watch more of The Film Optimist, you can catch up with the Advent Calendar of Scrooges, the playlist that starts from the very beginning right over there. And there is also a playlist that is my previous countdown, where I did 31 days of October, each day a different Dracula. That one is right up there. Until next time, I am Glenn Williams, the Film Optimist, reminding you to watch like it means something.